Praise Yahweh. What we're going to be continuing in today is we're going to be in the 8th book of Israel, part 2. And we're going to be picking up on in chapter 10. That's chapter 10. Okay, Yahweh is the only power. Yahweh is the only power. And this is number 8. In this lesson, Pastor goes over great detail, firstly, of the condition of the world, okay, the condition that the world is in, the condition that they have put themselves in and they find themselves in, and that same condition that they're trying to rid themselves of. Not having the answers, they wind up, continually turning around. It's like a continual spiral, and they're not getting anywhere. They're not moving forward. Okay, we see here, we'll go ahead and get started. So the title is, Yahweh is the only power, number 8. Don't keep the laws of Yahweh. This teaching first started with Cain, with Nimrod, then the Pharisees and the Roman Catholic Church. Okay, so Pastor, this is 2008. This message that Pastor has been showing us as to what the institutes of Nimrod were. Okay, what the institutes of Nimrod were, what the way of Cain is, what the Sodomite religion is, right? And all of these aspects, the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes, and Herodians, how they were not a righteous batch of people. They were actually the Coptic Catholics that came out of Egypt. Okay, that they were the ones who brought that teaching, that exact same teaching, out of Egypt and brought it into the place where Yahweh was bringing them to, which was the land of Israel, and never repented, right? Never turned entirely from their ways. If you remember, even in the days of King Josiah, he was really the only one. The amount of sacrifices that were offered and everything, it wasn't something that was consented upon with the children of Israel. The king said, look, this is what we're going to do. They followed suit. And in the scriptures, it shows that plainly, that he was really the only one to benefit from that zeal that he had. The rest of the millions of the children of Israel remained in their folly. Okay? So we see here these points that Pastor is making in this lesson. It illustrates that. Right? It makes it very, very plain. It makes it very simple to understand. What Pastor goes over here in verse 1 is he says, Shalom to everyone, and the peace of Yahweh be with each and every one of you. He said, let's see, before we start, I was told to pronounce the names of these cities. Now, the cities that he was told to pronounce were where the pipelines were going to go through in the former Soviet Union. These countries that are in the former Soviet Union. One of them was Baku. Another one was Tbilisi. I would pronounce it Tbilisi. Tbilisi. And the last one was Saihan. Just a few of the things, it says, just a few of the things here to show you what's taking place, just to keep you up to date in prophecy, right? To keep you up to date. Remember what Malachi Martin said, that this is a three-way battle between the Catholic Church, U.S., and Russia. And that war, that battle, is still going on today. Although there's been certain treaties and certain, Pastor had said at one point that the United States right now is actually backing up the Catholic Church. Okay? And then, of course, we see with Russia, Russia has her allies too, China and Iran, just to name a few, because there are many that back Russia. So, Pastor says here in verse 3, Russia is making preparations, of course, to keep the oil, protect the oil, like prophecy says, hurt not the oil. And they're rerouting the pipeline through those three cities, right? Verse 4. Debka files, military sources, place the United States nuclear weapons on in four former Soviet Central Asian bases. Now we see this is what Russia sees, and Russia knows that they better get ready. Those wars and rumors of war between the United States and Russia is such a long-standing conflict. You know, it's a long-standing war, whether Cold War, which is that Cold War is going to turn very, very hot here very soon. Okay, but in 2008, these were the issues that was going on between Russia and the United States. The conflict has continued, and it's remained up until today. You know, it's remained up until today. If you look on the news in the Black Sea right now, there's conflict. There's some jockeying for position done by the United States and Russia. Okay, the United States and Russia are jockeying for positions in the Black Sea. If you remember, Russia was always concerned about the United States taking up positions around Mother Russia. Okay, they were always concerned, and Pastor showed in this lesson that area that we're talking about is in that fourth part of the earth. Okay, that quarter, that area in and around the great river Euphrates. It's really an amazing thing for Yahweh to identify and pinpoint the direction where all of these conflicts are going to be stemming from. Okay, he actually pinpointed the region and the area where these conflicts are going to be stemming from, where they're going to be coming from. Right? And these are things that we need to understand and know and take to ourselves and really understand and be thankful to Father Yahweh that he's opened up our eyes to these things. Because this same book, just like what Pastor said, the book of Yahweh was put in the bosom of the beast for over 1,500 years. Right? She had the opportunity to rend that thing to the highest. But because there's various things that Yahweh said, no, you can't. You could, if you want to, you could go ahead and take my name out of there. Replace it with Lord, God, Baal, and all of these different things. What about Yahshua's name? Yeah, you could take that out too. What about all the prophets and apostles that have your name attached to it? You could go ahead and do that too. What about the prophecies? Hands off. Hands off the prophecies. This is how my people are going to know that I am the only source of power, right? That Yahweh is the only source of power. That's why the scripture shows us plainly, and in the second volume it says prophecy is for the believers, right? The fulfillment of prophecy is what the believers will look for and strengthen their faith using these things. But we know that the adversary has her work going simultaneously, right? Pastor has told us these things many, many times. Over here on page 102, we're going to read about the International Peace Day, right? Pastor says here in verse 11, the International Peace Day and it will be celebrated around the world. The 21st of September, okay, that name of the month. That's this month. The International Day of Peace. The International Day of Peace, or Peace Day, as it is often called, was established in 1981. Okay, 1981. Now, you remember that he said that they're going to be having their Peace Day the 21st of September, and that was in 2008. Okay, so that establishment, that beginning of those individuals seeking for peace but never able to come to find that peace. This is what Pastor points out about that. He says, by the United Nations resolution, the first official peace day was celebrated in September of 1982. If you had your calendar, you could look on the 21st of September for Peace Day. This was in July. Now in 1981, when the House of Yahweh, the House of Yahweh was granted official charter from the state of Texas in 1981. Verse 12, Pastor says, now in 1981 or 1982, September of that year, the International Peace Day, or the Day of Peace, it says the International Day of Peace or Peace Day, it is often called, was established in 1981 by the United Nations resolution, and the first official Peace Day was celebrated in September 1982. And Pastor says this kindly shows the work of Yahweh, the work of Yahweh keeping abreast of the world. And the house of Yahweh had to be established to bring this, of course. And that's exactly what we've done, right? So as they're crying out for peace, the Prince of Peace, which is Yahshua, our Messiah, who is in charge and guiding and directing this work in these last days, they're crying out for peace, and at the exact same time that they were making all of their attempts at peace, which you can plainly see have failed miserably, the house of Yahweh was established. Yahweh was like, okay, you want peace? Here's my house. Got its official charter from Texas in 1981. Okay, so this work, you can see, just like what Pastor said, this work is running side by side. Satan is trying to do her work, but Yahweh is also doing his work, right? And these two babies are going to be born at the same time. Okay, these two babies are going to be born at the same time. Pastor shows that they oftentimes what these people are seeking after is they're seeking after wealth, seeking to take advantage of one another. These things never bring peace. We see here in verse 16, it says, there's wealth in the United States, but even that is being fought over at this time. And it would only be a matter of time before there are big uprisings in the United States. It will only be a matter of time before there are big uprisings in the United States. We see these things occurring right now. Okay? And again, this was 2008 that he was identifying these things. And the reason why he knows these things is because he knows the curses of breaking Yahweh's law. It's war and continual war, just like Cain experienced. This death and destruction is coming forth because of the breaking of Father Yahweh's laws. The fulfillment of the prophecies is taking place because of Yahweh's law, whether it's being kept or whether it's being broken. Okay, verse 17. The laws of the kingdom, this will be something that everyone can agree on, and they can base their eternal life their eternal lives on these laws, knowing that it will always be this way. Okay? Yahweh changes not, and he's training us to be just like that, to understand the value and to understand to value Yahweh's laws above all else. Above all else. And it's the fulfillment of Yahweh's prophecy that's going to permit that. It's going to produce that. If we don't have the prophecies and the fulfilling of the prophecies, we don't have belief in Yahweh. We don't have the trust in Yahweh. Okay, but we can say, and what you should do is you should really take time, comb over the books of Israel and itemize. Right? Itemize which prophecies, large or small, because there are ones that Pastor paid attention to, but the world doesn't pay attention to. When Daniel said that knowledge would increase, the world doesn't pay attention to that prophecy. Right? The world doesn't pay attention to that prophecy. To them, that's just something that was said by the way. Right? But Pastor pointed it out. This is exactly what we're seeing today. Knowledge has increased. So much so to the point that the greatest deception is right at your fingertips. If you don't have Yahweh's spirit, which is guiding you and directing you, and the way to feed that spirit is through deeds of righteousness, performing Yahweh's will. Let's go to verse 18. If you think about it, 52 weeks. Pastor shows that there's 52 weeks that Yahweh gives us the opportunity to be in front of him, keeping the Sabbath day holy. Right? 52 Sabbaths in a 365-day period. And the keeping of that Sabbath is enough to strengthen you and keep you in front of Father Yahweh and where he can protect you, the protected place. Bringing us to the protected place where we are protected from COVID-19, where we're protected from the curses that come through illicit worship. You know, the practicing and the utilizing of illicit drugs and thievery and murder and strife and hatred and envy and all of these things that are practiced and taught in the world. Okay, they are practiced and taught in the world. Let's go over to verse 20. It says, and of course, we, the ones sitting here at this time period now, Yahweh intends to give you the power to bring peace, okay? Yahweh intends to give you that power. You won't all be corrupted. You won't all suffer corruption. So you will be able to be used by Father Yahweh, side by side with Yahweh in this work, guiding the captains over 50s, captains over hundreds, and so forth. That Moshe set up throughout all eternity. You'll be able to guide them. Okay, you will be able to guide them. When you look at the deception that's in the world today and how people are so easily swayed, you know, they're so easily, if we would just pay attention to the fundamentals, pay attention to the facts. You can't lean on your own understanding. A fool trusts in his own heart. You know, all of these points you can't, I mean, if you're leaning on your own understanding, you will be led astray. And it doesn't take much. She's more subtle, the adversary is more subtle and crafty than any other system out there. Okay? So we can't delude ourselves and think that, oh, well, you know, I'll know when the wrong thing is, but no, you won't. That's why the scripture says plainly that if it were possible, even the very elect would be deceived. That says a lot. That's not saying to us that, oh, everybody's just going to, you know, understand and know and we're all going to be saved. No. What that is saying, though, is that even those, if it were possible to deceive those who Yahweh has put his protection on, that's how deep the deception is going to be. To be able to take those who are Yahweh's elect, those who are making their calling and election sure. It would be so magnificent as to even deceive them, right? Those who will tickle your ears and make you feel great about yourself while feeding you pork, feeding you poison, feeding you a little bit of lies with a tiny bit of truth, right? But Yahweh's given us the foundation to stand upon, and we need to be thankful and always pray to Father Yahweh that he will keep us in his way, that he'll never allow us to be, as Pastor said so many times, keep us from that judgment, oh Father Yahweh. Keep us from that judgment of the Levites, the judgments of the Benjamites, the judgment of the Sodomites. Right? That's how this system is today. Let's go over to verse 23. It says, what we see taking place right now is what we see then in person, working with Yahweh week after week after week. That's what the Sabbath is going to be for, in order to get his blessings, right? In order to learn what Father Yahweh's blessings are and how to receive them. Remember the booklet, right? And know how to utilize it. Become skillful in the performance of Yahweh's law, so that when one comes up to deceive you, right? And if they say to you, come, let's follow after the gods, you have to know the difference. It's not just gonna be something that you have to educate yourself and know the difference. Know what Father Yahweh is telling you as opposed to what the gods are trying to deceive you with. So it says that his blessings mean the wisdom that it takes to work out problems. It says what caused the problems to begin with. Of course, the world now in Christianity, and this it says, and this is where it all started. Okay, Cain was a Catholic, the first pope. Right? That Christianity. It says this Christianity, it started with Cain. It didn't start with Yahweh. Okay? Yahweh didn't create evil. Okay? Yahweh did not create evil. Yahweh created his laws. And he created mankind with the desires, When those desires go out of control, they turn into illegal lust. When that illegal lust takes hold, it brings forth sin. And when that sin takes hold, it brings forth only one wage, which is death. There's only one way that you could go with sin, and that's straight to the grave. Right? So that's what Pastor says. He says here a little bit further down, let's go over to verse 24, the middle of verse 24. Get this in your minds. What the acts are, what the characteristic features are of Christianity, okay? We have to get these things in our minds. That one of the main characteristic traits of Christianity is ancestral worship. Okay? One of the main characteristic traits of Christianity and Catholicism. This is what the Catholics practice. Okay? The Catholics practice ancestral worship. The universal spirit, the universal soul. Right? Remember Eve in the beginning, you will not surely die. You'll just turn into an ancestor, or you'll turn into something else, and you'll come back as a rat, or you'll come back as a pigeon. You'll come back as a penguin. But your soul will never die. So you're telling me in all of these penguins, some of them who get eaten by orcas, these poor undead souls, once they get eaten by an orca, or a killer whale, then they come back as something else? There is nothing to back that up, nothing to prove that. But what we have is this written word that we can use as a foundation to follow after. Right? Let's go over to verse 26. This ark, right? Pastor is talking about the ark that floats. Okay? And he said it's what we have here is an example of that. In other words, things that are placed inside for preservation. Okay, and as testimony, right? This ark that we have in front that we minister before all the time, that's what it represents. The floating ark where Yahweh preserved his house, of course, the knowledge that he gave to mankind, and he wrote that he had Abel and Adam right. Okay, that knowledge that was able to save, and that is profitable for doctrine. Yahweh gave us the first volume of the book of Yahweh to show us his judgments. The second volume is to show us what type of individual we ought to be. When we have the practicing of Yahweh's laws, who will we be like? What will occur to us? All of these things are shown in the second volume of the book of Yahweh. Let's see here in verse 29, it says, "It was a strange thing, but there was another duck quacking." Right? That was after he spoke about the Pharisees, the Catholics turning into the Pharisees. Now the Pharisees, we have no record of them in the 12 tribes of Israel until Israel was taken. The 12 tribes of Israel were taken into Babylon, into captivity, right? Then you have the Babylonian Talmud. Okay, that's when they started changing their names. They started changing their names to hide and to be able to deceive. Verse 30, it says, "And they had all authority, and they could get here." It said they could get a hearing. So when the Pharisees, Sadducees, Essenes wanted to take someone to court and pin some case on them, they were able to get an audience with the Roman authorities. Just like that. Why? Because they are the Romans. They are in cahoots with the Roman Empire. Verse 31. This was their biggest issue. "But speak the name no more." Right? "But speak the name no more." Said, don't read it. Pastor says, they don't want you to read it in your poems. They don't want you to read it in your writings. They're so fearful of the name of Yahweh because of what it entails. The name of Yahweh means I am righteous because I have chosen to be righteous. And that means that all of the sons and daughters of Yahweh can be righteous if they will choose to be just like their Father. Be righteous as your Father in heaven is righteous. Right? Okay. We know that through prophecy is the only way that we're going to know which work is the right work. Right? The prophecy and the fulfillment of prophecy. If we don't look for the fulfillment of prophecy, then you'll never know which way is up. You'll hear a bunch of things that sound true and sound right? And that's that mixture. And it'll lead you astray. And that's why people stand so firmly on the little bits and pieces of truth that they supposedly find in many other religions. Right? And that's why initially the first thing that has to occur is we have to receive the calling of Yahweh. That's what cuts through all the mire and all the muck and all the deception and all the other things. It's the calling of Yahweh that gives you that spark, that zeal, that moves you toward the right thing. That's Yahweh's work. Yahweh did that. Then he brought you to his house, said, look, you must learn this way. Make your calling and your election sure. Okay? So if you all would read the rest of page 104, let's pick up on verse 40, and we'll just read verse 40 real quick. It said, they stand there today with their little books in their hands, and they stand in front of a rock wall. This is part of those deceived individuals, right? Somebody asked them, what does it feel like when you stand in front of this here, praying all day, and you never get an answer? And they said, sometimes it feels like we're just talking to a rock wall. Right? That's about as much benefit that you get out of these religions, this Christianity that's been taught. Right? But Yahweh teaches us to have self-control, to understand the plan of Yahweh, and to look forward to the fulfillment of Yahweh's plan. Right? You will not be disappointed. Guaranteed, you will not be disappointed. Yahweh has shown it. He's ratified it. He's pure. He's making his people pure, right? And in his image and likeness. And we have all thanks and glory to Father Yahweh for these things. If you'd all please stand. At this time, I'd like to turn the class over to the great priest, Kahan Zephaniah Heimerman Hawkins.
Shalom, everyone. Yahweh's peace and blessings be with each and every one of you. We're going to continue here where the great Kahan left off on. We're actually going to pick up on page 105, and those of you who might just be joining us, I'm going to go back and read what chapter we're on. This is chapter 10. We're in the 8th book of Israel. This is Persecuted but Not Forsaken, part 2. And chapter 10, we're still in the series here, Yahweh is the Only Power, and this is number 8 of those series of sermons, subtitled here, Don't Keep the Laws of Yahweh. Now that's in parentheses because that's the teaching that is coming forth that started with Cain and has made its way all the way down, continued down through the Pharisees and now the Roman Catholic Church. So this subtitle here is, Don't Keep the Laws of Yahweh. This teaching first started with Cain, with Nimrod, then the Pharisees, and the Roman Catholic Church. So let's pick up on page 105 here, and we'll pick up in verse 41. Well, that's about as far as it gets with them because they won't call on Yahweh. Okay, and this was the instruction that they were given. We'll actually see where one of those directives were given by Pope Benedict when he said, don't use the name. And this is what Pastor is actually referring to right here in this verse. He says, they are taking the same advice as the Pope is giving today. The Pope is saying, use the name no more. You don't find the prophets saying that. There's no prophet in all the Holy Scriptures that ever said, don't use the name Yahweh. But yet these prophets are saying, and which prophets is he referring to here? The prophets that Jeremiah, in Jeremiah chapter 23, verse 21, said, I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. So they went to go do a work, but it wasn't a prophesied work. It wasn't a work of Yahweh. It was their own work. It was a work actually against the real work that Yahweh was doing. So they say here, don't use the name Yahweh. But yet, these prophets are saying, don't use the name. So Yahweh said, I didn't send them. And this is an article here, if you can see this right here. If you can see this article right here. This is from Catholic.org, and this was one of the directives that came out that Pope Benedict XVI actually brought out, reminding everyone because they said the name Yahweh had kind of crept back into some of their liturgy and some of their songs, and they put out this. The Pope put out this directive here saying we need to make sure we remove it. It has to stay removed from anything that the Catholic Church uses. This was their directive that he put out. And I just want to read a little bit of it. It says here, Vatican says no Yahweh in songs, prayers at Catholic Masses. The Vatican has reiterated a directive that the name, and of course they use the name, I'm going to read it how they have it here. The Vatican has reiterated a directive that the name of God revealed in the Tetragrammaton, YHWH, so they admit here that is the true name, YHWH, is not to be pronounced in Catholic liturgy or in music. Catholics at worship should neither sing nor pronounce the name of God as Yahweh, the Vatican has said, citing the authority of Jewish and Christian practice. Okay, and then it goes on here. It says, the instruction came in a letter, June 29th, letter to Catholic bishops conference around the world from the Vatican's top liturgical body, the Congregation for Divine Worship and Sacraments, by an explicit directive of Pope Benedict XVI. In recent years, the practice has crept in of pronouncing the God of Israel's proper name. Now the letter noted, referring to the four-consonant Hebrew Tetragrammaton, YHWH. The name is commonly pronounced Yahweh. So there was one of their directives, as Pastor here is showing us, proving to us in the Scriptures, and really letting all the world know that this started with Cain and has continued all the way down and is still taking place here in these last days with the Roman Catholic Church. They're following that same teaching. That was always their teaching, and now you see it's continuing. And in this sermon, Pastor references, he said it's the same quack. Okay, it's the same, it might be a different duck, but it's the same quack. They're teaching, it's the same teaching that they've always had. So let's continue here on verse 43. Now, shortly after Solomon's time, another group took over in Babylon, and they said, don't use the name. So whether it was Cain or the elders of Israel, the Pharisees, the Roman Catholic Church, it doesn't matter. They're still the same group here. Now this should start tying in this group in Babylon when I said this is where it began, in Babylon. It didn't really begin there. The quacking started with Cain. And then after the flood, it started with Nimrod. Remember Cush begot this system, this Nimrod system, where through their schools of higher learning, they made sure they took out everything that would give Yahweh any credit. They totally took out Yahweh from it. And in so doing, they actually took any perfection and any peace, they removed that as well. When they removed Yahweh's teachings, that's the only teachings that would bring peace to them. They took all that out. They didn't want to give Yahweh any credit. So then after the flood, it started with Nimrod. The same things that Cain taught, Nimrod taught too. Well, the things that Yahweh allowed Cain to write, this Christian teaching, and I call it Christian because Christianity follows it today. The same thing that he allowed Cain to write was also on that ark. And remember, Pastor explained it, that work was actually, their evil work was actually preserved through the genes that were carried on that ark. Yahweh allowed that to be that way so that his plan could be fulfilled. And that's what we're going to see, that everything was done so that Yahweh could fulfill his plan. So he allowed that. That was preserved. The two works that Yahweh allowed, the tree of life and the mixture of the tree of life and evil. That's actually the tree of life and evil mixture. The teachings that actually caused the flood, yes, was protected, and Nimrod took up that after the flood and started teaching it again. Okay, so that teaching of Cain was preserved, and then it was continued through that confusion, that system of confusion, and it came down all the way, and you see the bits and pieces of it throughout the Scriptures. You see those that rebelled, the ones that rebelled against Samuyl, who was Yahweh's priest at that time, the elders of Israel. They said the same thing. We don't want Yahweh in our lives here. We want to be ruled like these other nations. We want the kings over us instead. Then you have the scribes and Pharisees that came on, the Essenes, the Herodians, and so forth, those that were in control of the temple, as Pastor also explains here in this sermon. They did the same thing. They were teaching against Yahweh's laws. So let's turn the page here, and we'll go to page 106. Well, he says, I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. And this was a continuation here of Jeremiah chapter 23, verses 21 and 22. I've not sent these prophets, yet they ran. So they had no right. They went out on their own. And we should realize this and see the importance of what we do, that we make sure we have the authority. When Yahweh puts us in certain positions, we will never go out and do things on our own. We will make sure we have Yahweh's blessings, that we are sent, that Yahweh sends us to actually, whatever our job is, whatever our responsibility is, whatever our instructions are, we need to be sent out. We need to have that authority. So this group here, as the prophet said, I've not sent these prophets, yet they ran. Okay, he was quoting what Yahweh said. It's a far cry from who Yeshua is, the kind of character that Yeshua had. So you see the difference in the character that Yahweh had, that Yeshua had, that Yahweh's priests and prophets had, from this other group. Okay, and you can read, but you can go back and you can look on page 105. But Pastor tells an example here about in Israel how the Pharisees, they still run it, and they're very unfair with the people. And that lust for money, that greed and so forth, that has just, it's a totally different character than what you see Yeshua having, what Yahweh displayed, and so forth. And this is what Pastor's pointing out to us. He's pointing out this difference in character. He said, it's a far cry from who Yeshua is, the kind of character that Yeshua had, the kind of character that Yahweh himself showed. Yahweh himself showed in the very first Sabbath that he created for mankind when he became their slave, cooked their meals, prepared their food, and served them in everything. But they said it was so joyous there. Now, in between verses 48 and 49, if you actually listen to the audio recording here of the sermon, Pastor tells about a dream that that somebody in the house of Yahweh had, and they came and shared it with them. And Pastor remembered how they shared the joy that everyone in the house of Yahweh had, and what the dream was there was a planet that was actually given to the house of Yahweh members, and it was where they could go after their work was done on that planet, and they had their jobs, but they also had the time for other things there. And Pastor said it was so joyous there. Everyone was so joyous on that planet. And they saw the whole house of Yahweh on this planet. They were all doing their thing, but having joy. It was much longer than that, referring to the dream, and much more detailed, but that was the essence of the whole thing. It was a very joyous thing that Yahweh says, "Eye has not seen, neither has it entered into your ears, or even the hearts of man, the joy that Yahweh has in store for you, the things that he has in store for you." And, this is the internal joy that Yahweh intends to give his people. Yes, we face the tests and the trials right now, but we also need to find our joy in the house of Yahweh. And as Pastor has instructed, when you find that joy, you got to hang on to it. You have to hang on to that joy. But the joy here is going to be greatly magnified in Yahweh's kingdom, and everything that we do is going to be of the utmost joy, extreme joy. Everything that we do, our whole life, will be just filled with that perfect, wonderful joy that mankind does truly desire and want to have, and they will have it if they keep Yahweh's laws. Okay, let's look down at verse 52. And this is verse 22 of Jeremiah chapter 23. But if they had stood in my counsel, which means they're not standing in Yahweh's counsel, and had caused my people to hear my words. Now that word is debar, meaning the laws and prophets, which means they're not hearing Yahweh's laws or prophets from this group. Then they would have turned them from their evil way and from the evil of their doings. Well, what is this evil? We'll look down at verse 26. How long will this be in the heart of the prophets who prophesy lies? Yes, they are prophets of the deceit of their own minds. Verse 27. Who devise, they plan and scheme to cause my people to forget my name. And that was that's what we just read there. And that's a last days, account of them just reiterating the fact that started way back in these days here, started with Cain, but the prophet Jeremiah wrote about what their intentions were, and they've continued that same intention. They want to just remove Yahweh from everything. Okay, so in verse 55 and verse 56, Pastor, he explains how Yahweh's people went into a time of captivity here, and this is where they were taught a totally different way of life. And it wasn't an effort to remove any truth, any righteousness that they were taught, to totally remove that from the people of Yahweh. So, picking up midway down here in verse 56, they learned a different language, they had different teachers, those different teachers quacked a different message, okay, different from the righteous teachings that the children of Israel were being taught, the true believers were being taught. They weren't the same ducks that Abel had, okay, or the same message that Abel taught. They totally brought a different message, and one of them was saying, don't use the name Yahweh. Okay, so let's look down at verse 58. Of course, Yahweh said they didn't know it was actually me who was doing this, and that he was referring to them receiving some of the blessings. And they didn't realize that yet, that Yahweh was the one blessing them. He was in full control the whole time. They thought it was the Queen of Heaven. So why did he do it? Well, he said, I will send them strong delusions so they can believe these lies that they want to believe because they don't want to keep my laws. So I'll let them see what turning from my laws will bring them, and let them see how they come out, and we'll let them see how they come out in the end. Well, they're seeing right now how it's coming out for them in the end, and really, mankind isn't liking it. They don't like the situation that they're dealing with. Many people are scared. They're trying to develop these COVID disaster plans, and how they're going to handle this curse, this plague that they themselves have created. So, Yahweh's allowing them to see how it's going to turn out for them, and they're seeing it, and they're not liking it. So I'll let them see what turning from my laws will bring them, and let's see how they come out in the end. And let's call heaven and earth to witness how it comes out. That's Yahweh's plan from the beginning. From the beginning, he had this plan. So that was the reason Yahweh allowed it to be preserved on the ark, and it continued. Of course, the righteousness was there as well, and that was Yahweh's plan. But remember, it was actually, he allowed Cain's teaching there as well, just so it could continue afterwards, so that Yahweh's plan could be fulfilled. Okay, let's look at verse 60. Now I'm going to stop on that one, and we're going to go over to Yochanan chapter 4. Now, it's in their teachings, brethren, if you want to identify these people, the characteristics, their characteristic teachings, their personalities, their character, what they bring forth, the character they bring forth. So, remember how he said that Yeshua's character, Yahweh's character, very different from the character that we see in the Scriptures, displayed in the Scriptures back in Yeshua's day, very different from the character we see that the one who that Yada has right now, as they have their hand on the neck. They always want to put that squeeze on those that they're in control of. So it's a very different character than Yahweh's righteous character. Let's look at verse 62. Well, Daniel and his crew had already been taught. So if you remember Daniel, very young, and he had his friends with him. They were taught righteousness. They had great teachers, and these were magnificent young individuals here, very, very trained, very brilliant, because they had been brought up in Yahweh's way. Well, they were young men, so they already knew the laws of Yahweh, and Yahweh gave them honor in the sight of the king. And in fact, Yahweh gave Daniel great honor in the sight of the king, especially when he revealed this dream, because the king knew he had power that the Christian world at that time didn't have. And I'm saying Christian here because Christianity is what they taught here. Don't pronounce the name Yahweh. Don't pronounce the name never came from the prophets of Yahweh. It only comes from the Catholic Church. Was the Catholic Church in operation at that time? Yes. They started with Nimrod. Before Nimrod, it started with Cain. Cain taught the same thing that the Catholic Church is teaching today. And that's the point here, this sermon that Pastor is teaching. He wants to show us here it's the same thing. It's just continued down. But they have so much removed Yahweh and his teachings that now we are seeing the end result of that. We see the whole buildup of all these years of rejecting Yahweh and what it's bringing. And mankind is seeing it now too, and they don't like it. So, I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's go to Yochanan chapter 4. Well, in verse 64, now notice verse 19 of Yochanan 4, the woman said to him, "Man, I see you are a prophet." Well, of course, this woman had to have been studying something in order to know this. And of course, at that time, where she was living, she was kind of out away from the control of the Pharisees, who were actually the ones that were trying to do away with the Scriptures and telling everyone you can't understand the Scriptures, we'll teach you the oral law. Well, see, that was just like they did in Daniel's day. That was a way for them to get control of the situation. They didn't want people to know Yahweh. They didn't want them to know the Scriptures. They told them, you can't understand these things. You can't understand what's written there, which was just flat out lies, as the prophets warned the people that would be done. And they said these people are going to come and they're going to hide the name Yahweh. They're going to remove the name Yahweh. They're going to remove it from the Scriptures. They're going to make you think you can't understand the Scriptures, and they're going to teach you a different message. They're going to quack a different tune, which is a different teaching that was not in the beginning there with Abel, but it came forth when Cain started teaching. Okay, so let's look at verse 67. Well, you remember the crew that came against Azariah and Nehemiah. They were controlling the land at that time. If it hadn't been a court order given by a king to leave Azariah and Nehemiah alone and let them do this work, it wouldn't have been done. And in verse 68, Pastor says, you think about that in the work today, brethren. The house of Yahweh was legally established. It was legally established, backed by the American government in 1981. And that was what it actually meant to be established. The establishment of the house of Yahweh, it had to be legally recognized by the government. Well, the same thing had to take place in Israel, or Azariah and Nehemiah would never have been able to come back and start a work to get a temple built, and of course a place where Yeshua would come, where Yeshua and all the people would come to witness what was going on for the Savior to be killed. So all of that was part of Yahweh's plan. It was fulfilled that it might be fulfilled what was written by the prophets. And notice what Pastor says right here. He says, that's the reason Yahweh keeps pointing you back to this, so you will know that you can depend on what he wrote by the prophets. You see how important it is to believe these prophecies? The fearful, in verse 70, he says, the fearful and unbelieving will have their part in the lake of fire. You better start remembering that. You better start humbling yourself as a little child, and you better start believing these prophecies, brethren. There's no ifs, ands, and buts. You're kicking yourself out. You're kicking yourself out of the kingdom if you want to rebel and argue and fight. As the apostle said, don't even go near that pool of ducks. If they're quacking a different doctrine, get away from them. So this is why Pastor keeps referring us. He so strongly pushes us to believe these prophecies, to believe what's written. We're seeing them come to pass. We've been witnessing this for years and years and years in the house of Yahweh. We see the prophecies being fulfilled. Let's look at page 108 here in verse 72. But it had to be for the Savior's death. And then after the Savior's death, the prophecy said he would come to his own, and his own would reject him. Well, that prophecy had to be fulfilled. And remember how Pastor explained that the reason you know that Yeshua was the Savior was because he fulfilled all the prophecies written about him. That prophecy had to be fulfilled. It would have destroyed the whole work if it had been done in Israel. Okay, and remember, that was the whole reason that the temple was built, because you look back to Exodus chapter 12, it's verse 5 and 6, where it says the whole congregation of Israel, where they separated the lamb there, and that is the correlation with the sacrifice of Yeshua, who was our lamb. But the whole house of Israel had to agree with that killing, and that's what they did when they said, nail him to the stake. So they all agreed upon it. But it wasn't done in Abelin. That's where the true work was. It was done in Jerusalem. Well, they would have destroyed that work. That work had to survive. It was still in action when Yeshua and the apostles, or when Yeshua appeared to his apostles and said, I'm going to Abelin. Before his death, he said, I'll meet you in Abelin. I'll meet you at the house of Yahweh in Abelin after my resurrection. They didn't hear it for some reason, And that's why they didn't hear it, because Yahweh wanted to make a big deal out of it so you would remember, because the work of Yahweh was still in Abelin at that time. So that was the true work. It never left there. It was there. It was there. But as Yeshua explained to the woman, there's going to come a time where it's going to be neither here nor there, because it will have moved to a totally different land, a land not yet discovered, which he was referring to the prophecies that said it would be established here in the United States. So all of that was in that teaching here, and Yeshua was explaining it. He didn't give her all of it, but he gave her enough. So let's continue here. He said, but Yeshua said to her, "Woman, believe me, the hour comes when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain nor in Jerusalem." Okay, so let's look at verse 78. But she was a part of Christianity, but she'd been studying the house of Yahweh. So, he explains that she had to be reading something, some of the truth there, and Pastor says some of the house of Yahweh literature. You could see that because she knew Yeshua was a prophet. She knew some of the prophecies that were written, but at the same time, she was following laws that weren't from the prophets. So she was at a stage like we see today when Yahweh calls or starts calling people out of this Babylonish religion, which supports divorce and remarriage over and over and over. And that's what she had fallen into, was that same practice of Christianity. So let's look now at verse 84. Now that's the one thing about Yahweh's laws. None of the gods have Yahweh's laws except what they've borrowed them. And it's actually, you could say it's kind of more like a borrowing without permission, which is a form of stealing, because that's exactly what they did. And then they tried to change them to fit themselves, to make themselves look righteous. So, they knew, Satan knows, the gods know that Yahweh is the only one that has a way to peace. He has only righteous laws that would actually give mankind what they truly desire after, the peace that they desire. So they tried to claim some of these things as their own and make it look like they themselves are righteous. They'll borrow some of them, but they won't enforce those laws, but they will borrow some of them to make themselves look great to a certain extent. But they deny the authority of Yahweh, as the apostle said. Now verse 23 here, but the hour comes, so he's back in Yochanan chapter 4 here, going back to the scripture here where Yeshua is speaking to this woman. He says, but the hour comes, and now is, when the true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For the Father seeks just such worshipers to worship him in spirit. Now Yahweh is spirit, and those who worship him must worship him in spirit. And, Pastor explains that because verse 88, he says, but what does worshiping in spirit mean? Well, according to Christians, it means that you just think righteousness. All you have to do is think righteousness. But they're thinking they're supposed to think righteously while they're committing sodomy, bestiality, fornication, and adultery. The four things that have brought this nation down and would actually destroy all mankind if Yahweh gave it time to do so. But he won't. So we know that mankind, through their hatred, through their lust for stealing and so forth, they're going to, the nuclear wars is what's going to bring their system that is totally against Yahweh. That's what's going to bring that system to an end. But any one of these things here that Pastor just mentioned would do the same over time. You see how it's already affecting mankind in the sickness, the disease that is so widespread today. So continuing, he says, he's not going to allow that. He's going to allow the nuclear bombs to be used. First, over that fourth part of the earth, around the great river Euphrates, where a third part of man will die by nuclear wars and famine. Okay, well, we're going to conclude here. Let's conclude by reading verse 92. And this worshiping in spirit that they got when they think they're in the spirit, when they're righteous in their mind, they know they're evil in their mind. They know they're committing sin, so their sin is not hidden from them. But they are being taught or they're being taught that their sins won't be held against them if they'll think they're doing righteousness. You know, dream that you're doing righteousness while you commit these evil acts. Well, that's what they teach. The house of Yahweh has a different quack, but it's not a duck. It doesn't follow this duck. And I'll show it to you more next week. Okay, and what Pastor's saying there is, you know, we have to follow the righteousness that Abel taught, not the evil like the gods that Cain brought forth. Yahweh bless your understanding. If ever